Okay, so now for resource 4, we're talking about clinical implications using a multicultural lens. So we've talked a lot about multiculturalism, using it in supervision, and how there's those isomorphic parallel processes that go from supervisee to client. So it's really important to recognize clinical implications and what using a multicultural lens is all about now. Okay, so now we're looking at alliance and satisfaction. So when I say alliance, it means we are talking about the enhanced supervisory working alliance, right? So we're talking about that supervision alliance, and then we're going to talk about that client therapist alliance. So basically, what needs to happen here is this. This, if I could do a straight line, this is the most important aspect to remember, right? So there needs to be a positive contribution and room for growth in the dyad. So growth is what we're based on as clinicians, right? So we have this multicultural processes. There needs to be a growth of understanding those processes and how to integrate those processes, and for it to be positive. As we talked about, there's so many oppressive systems that face the sexual minority and ethnic minority community, that this space could be the only positive contribution that they have. So that's something to really pay attention to and base your multicultural supervision and alliance and satisfaction on. So these positive multicultural experiences really lead to these positive supervisory reflections, and these reflections lead to positive client mental health outcomes. If you guys can see what I'm doing here, it's a constant process. And if you can visualize what that looks like, if I can draw here, right? So these are all connected. Here's the client, supervisor, and therapist. So it happens here at the supervisor level, goes to the therapist, which goes to the client, and the client outcomes influences the supervisor. Okay, so it's this it's this systemic process that's going on. So you need to have these opportunities for increasing multicultural sensitivity and create that space for openness, encouragement, and support. We all have stereotypes. And it's not because we force them, but it's because we are in a society where we see them all the time. And when we see certain sentences, we think certain things. So that's something you need to remember. What are your stereotypes? And that we all have them. But when you're working with your clients, when you're working with your supervisees, they should not be there, because it will hinder your learning environment. And you really need to believe in your supervisee's abilities to work with cultural issues presented in therapy. Just because they identify as say a white straight man doesn't mean that they cannot fully work with ethnic sexual minority. Um, the whole being and purpose there is, if you create positive contribution and growth and environment of openness, encouragement, and support, then their client will have that, because they are also going to create that atmosphere. Again, going back to the isomorphic parallel process, whatever happens up here is going to happen here and will affect here. Okay. So now we have a clinical presence. This clinical presence, and this is basically experiential training, that there needs to be a discussion of power, privilege, and culture very early on. One of my supervisors, I think he does a great job. He automatically starts off supervision saying, okay, I know my position. I am a white, heterosexual, straight, or yeah, same thing, man, who has a lot of privilege, who is in academia, who has a doctorate degree. He has very high privilege, and he recognizes that, and he puts that out very early, and he puts that out there, and he creates that space and that environment and gives the opportunity to be able to discuss these issues of power and privilege. And we get reflective questions from that, and this is something that you should do as a supervisor And also do as a therapist, right? You want to reflect and learn about your supervisees or your clients' experiences. So learn and ask how their culture influenced their world. Um, some clients may grow up in a Catholic household. That Catholic culture influences their world, what attachment could look like, what relationships look like, what they learn, what they study, what they take in, what they believe, what their faith. These cultures influence their worlds and their lives. Cultural genograms. So cultural genograms is actually pretty fun. So as marriage and family therapists, we all know what a genogram is. It shows basically it's like a family tree. So in the family tree, that instead of putting in just here's their age, here's who they are, we want to focus on the cultural piece. So if we're gonna draw one up here, right? Remember, this is um, mother, and this is another mother, and come down here. Let's say they have 2 kids. Oops. And a dog. There we go. Okay, so here is the small genogram. So instead of just putting, Shirley is 31, Aaron is 29, Bill and Susie, I know these are very typical names, so I'm recognizing my own privilege here, or my own stereotypes or biases. Say 4 and 2. And so instead of just putting the ages and what they do, we're going to put cultural things. So mom, and I'm just going to do that because I can't write too much. So let's say she's Latina, okay? And let's say other mommy is identifies as black. So that means these babies are, and when they went to sperm donor, they decided to have a Latino sperm donor, which makes these babies bicultural. And we think, okay, well, what else can go in culture? She was raised, and I'm just going to put on religiosity. And this mom is also raised in religiosity. This mommy was raised on dancing, D for dancing. This mommy did not dance at all. So, as you can see, I'm getting into like the ethnicity piece. I'm getting into cultural pieces rather than just who they are, how old are they, where are they from, and we get to see like how this family is working and what culture and how culture influences their family. And again, creating an open and safe space and an environment, and then expanding, and this is something important as professionals, we need to expand our professional commitment to multicultural counseling, right? And we could do that through associations of multicultural counseling development, being part of even the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter, being part of NAACP, National African American, CP. I think it's, do not remember the last, what that stands for, but things like that, or being part of sexuality and education counselors. So anything like that, and something that you are interested in, and also that you like to advocate for. Okay, so incorporating multicultural awareness in the therapy session and in supervision, we're going to use the Sue and Sue 2009 model. Sue and Sue, just a little background on them, very big names in multicultural counseling, have published books and multiple articles on how to work with clients and mostly how to work with clients and who identify with a multicultural or who identify with a minority group. And so basically we're going to take their model and we're going to adapt it not just for clients, but we're going to adapt it for supervisee-supervisor relationship. So in stage 1, you have unawareness. So this is what I said before about understanding what those biases are, and not, well, it's like not understanding them. So you're just going about the world not understanding what your stereotypes are, what your biases are, what the privileges are. So now you begin awareness. When I say beginning awareness, there's going to be an uneasiness of societal statuses. So if your clients or your supervisees have never thought about their privilege, they're gonna feel awkward. Like, what do you mean? Like, just because I'm a white female doesn't mean I can't work with Latina females, or like just because I'm still a woman. And so these are just, and I'm giving you examples of what has happened in the past to me and to other supervisors. There's going to be a slight pushback, but you need to continue going and beginning awareness by doing these activities, by doing the cultural genogram, asking reflective questions. Then there's going to be a conscious awareness, how the system really works. So now there's going to be an awareness of, wow, I didn't realize that society is basically making African Americans continue to live in poverty, or as lower socioeconomic status, because they ultimately, there's prevention and lack of resources for those communities, so they stay in low SES homes. So that's how the system is working. And then there's the consolidated awareness. There's that acceptance and understanding, which this could take a while to get to because of where it actually is and where it's at. And accepting and understanding can be a difficult thing to do. Actually accepting that there's prejudice and there's oppression in the world when you've lived a very, I'm not gonna say sheltered, but when you've lived in a life or lived in a world where you didn't have to really think about it before, actually understanding what someone who's going through multiple oppressions, particularly the sexual minority community, and how their rights can be taken away just like that in an instant, is something to really recognize and empathize with. And then finally, you have transcendent awareness, and that's the ability to perceive these fundamental human qualities and realize that there are these differences, but being able to process and sit with those differences and continue to push through and work with them, and work with your clients and work with your supervisees. And this is a very beautiful thing, and the ultimate goal for every multiculturally competent counselor, particularly working with sexual minorities and ethnic minorities. So now I have research implications. Research is really important, not just for clinical sakes, but researching the clinical implications. There's a gap there. So I want to talk about research so we can close that gap, because we do, as researcher and a researcher myself, we do all this work to create these clinical implications so clinicians can use them, but how many times do clinicians read articles when they see 40 clients in a week or more? So I wanted to put this in here, and I'm just going to go through and just talk about what this means. So theoretical versus empirical research. So empirical is that evidence stuff. So it's like if you actually run a test with a family, as say okay, I'm going to run this intervention, and we're going to take a survey at first, and then we're going to take a survey at the end, and then have a placebo where a client doesn't do the intervention and do a survey at the beginning and the end and see if that intervention actually helped. Theoretical is kind of like now, as in we're adapting this cross-cultural model, but we haven't actually put it to test yet. Feedback loops, which we've learned as mental health professionals. These feedback loops, recognizing, being able to observe these sessions and see, oh, okay, here's where this learning happened. Here's that interaction. Now there's feedback, and then there's that interaction again, and then there's that implementation. Measuring the cognitive learning styles. So seeing, again, this is all really observing, and so possibly doing qualitative stuff, which is interviews, but seeing when is this learning happening? How is this multicultural interaction occurring? And then not only doing that with therapists and their clients, but with supervisors and supervisees. How is that crossing? How are these parallel processes working? And we really, I mean, we talk about increasing diversity courses and with ongoing discussions, and the question is, do they really work? We need to measure that. We need to measure if putting in diversity discussions once every week versus having that 1 week throughout the semester, if that's really going to help with the multicultural outcomes. As a researcher and having my own biases, I hypothesize that having it once a week at least will absolutely create positive change. And personally, I don't think it should just be once a week either. It should be included in every single learning experience. Matching is if a therapist and a supervisor, say, both identify as lesbian or both are Latina. So they may be possibly able to like work with each other in a unique way, but research lacks in that. We don't know. And then here's the big thing with research: diversity really does lack. Diversity comes with what's that word? With being able to get a population that is easy to obtain. And those are college students, and generally research only a majority of research focuses on white people. So it lacks diversity, and we need to like increase that. And then mixed methods, which is just quantitative and qualitative put together. And so having that measurement and then having those interviews and that actual narrative to get the rich stories of these experiences. So that was a bit about what clinical and research implications are using multicultural supervision. And here are just pictures to remind you of why it's so important. These people need our help, and these communities need our help as mental health professionals, and we need to remember why it's so important. Okay.